the previous videos, we introduced what is rubrics. We mentioned about different components of the rubrics, how to construct the rubrics, as well as the usage of the rubrics. As a summary, the rubrics serve as the guideline to the lecturers and the students in terms of the rating of the students' performance over some assessment which is subjective in nature. Its main function is to ensure the consistency in terms of the rating by different assessor over the same students or by the same assessor over different students. From the perspective of the students, rubrics serve as a guideline for them to know the focus of the assessment as well as the ultimate expectations from the students from various aspects. Now, from the perspective of the lecturer, it is not merely for the rating purposes. It is also a tool to facilitate the learning of the students. Now, when constructing the rubrics, make sure the descriptions are explicit and it must be something that can be observed by the assessor. It should not be something that is declared by the students or something assumed by the assessor. The students will have to demonstrate evidences in terms of their performance so that the assessor can appropriately determine the levels of performance. Now let us proceed with the discussions about rubrics. There are two main types of rubrics. One is holistic rubrics, another one is analytic rubrics. This is a typical holistic rubrics. You will see that in terms of the dimension, there is only one dimension here, as highlighted here. Normally the descriptions it would be rather long, which is normally written in the paragraphs. As for the analytic rubrics, the criteria are clearly specified. In this case, we have 5 criteria. In terms of the descriptions of different levels of performance, we have 4 levels of quality and 5 criteria here. Each criteria have 4 levels of quality. In total, there shall be 20 descriptions in terms of the performance criteria. The analytic rubrics is different from the holistic rubrics. Holistic rubrics has only one dimension, while the analytic rubrics have 2 dimensions. And it is assessing the students' achievements based on multiple criteria. It is normally written in a table form. There are advantages and disadvantages of these 2 rubrics. The advantages of the holistic rubrics include emphasize on what is demonstrated rather than what is not. It is saving times by minimizing the numbers of decisions the assessor need to make while assessing the student's performance. In terms of the disadvantages, it does not provide specific feedback for improvement, and when students' work is varying at different levels spanning the criteria point, it can be difficult to select the single best description. That means you cannot ensure an entirely objective assessment using this holistic rubric. It does provide some guidelines which may not be refined enough as compared to analytic rubrics. This may lead to the difficulty, most suitable levels of performance. As for the analytic rubrics, the advantages are providing useful feedback on the area of strength and weaknesses, and the criterions can be weighted to reflect the relative importance of each dimension. For example, if you find these criteria to be the most important of all, you can actually apply weightage there so that this criteria carry more weightage relative to the others. Now, knowing that this criteria is more important than the others, students will have to make sure that they will not miss it and really pay more attention trying to score this as compared to the other criteria which is less important. These are the advantages of analytic rubrics. However, there are also disadvantages. It takes more time to create and use than holistic rubrics, especially when you have 2 dimensions here. You will need to first determine the criteria to be assessed, determine the numbers of levels that you need to define. Now you have to construct the definitions of the performance criteria. You will develop the highest level and then the lowest level, and then try to work out what is in between. There shall be explicit differences between different levels, so that the assessor will not mess up and wrongly define the appropriate levels of performance. Even though there are criteria, for a single criteria, we will have to identify the indicators from various perspectives, focus on something that can be observed in order to prove the achievement of the respective criteria, and then work out with the proper terminology to differentiate different levels of performance. Once you have completed one criteria, you will continue for the others. Compared to holistic rubrics, developing the analytic rubrics is more time consuming. And then when you need to define those criteria, you have to be extra careful about the terminologies. Make sure it is clear, explicit, and commonly understood by different assessors. Otherwise, this may lead to inconsistent and unreliable rating in terms of the student's performance. There is another way to classify the rubrics. There are generic rubrics. There are also task-specific rubrics. The generic rubrics are more general in nature. It is not really governed by the specific task or informations which is incorporated within the assessment. The generic rubrics focus more on the general characteristics of certain tasks, which can be used across the board on any assessment of different topics, different courses with similar nature. For example, rubric to assess the writing skills, problem-solving skills, and communication skills. These are general, which can be used in many courses without difficulty. As for the task-specific rubric, it is more particular in terms of the task or work carried out by the students, such as giving an answer, or giving certain specific conclusions, or carry out certain tasks which are unique and specifically designated to certain course or topic. In another word, the task-specific rubrics are custom-made to certain assignments or projects, where you have the learning process, steps, procedures clearly spelled out, and the assessment shall focus on all those. As for the generic rubrics, it is more applicable to the relevant soft skills, which is required in many courses. Therefore, you may use the similar generic rubrics for different courses, but for task-specific rubrics, it is only applicable for certain courses only. Now, what are the advantages of generic rubrics? There will be consistency in terms of the assessment of the task of a similar nature, and you may reuse the same rubric with several tasks or assignments. The disadvantages are it can be vague for the students to see what a good work looks like, because it is not that specific. Because of this, the reliability of different assessors will be lower, as this is more subjective as compared with the task-specific rubrics. How about the advantages of task-specific rubrics? The scoring is easier, the descriptions is more clear-cut, the focus of the assessments are clearer. As a result, the consistency between different assessors can be ensured. Now the disadvantages are: the task-specific rubrics cannot be used universally among different assignments. You will need new rubrics for new tasks, and you have to be careful about the open-ended tasks. You know that the principles of the rubrics, if it is not specified in the rubrics, that should not be taken into consideration. Now, what if in the open-ended task there are some good answers or good things demonstrated by the students, just happen that it is not listed in the rubrics? Those are not being taken into considerations. This may not be fair to the students. Now let us look at some examples of these two types of rubrics. This is a generic rubrics, where the criteria here are quite general about the organizations. It is not bound by the topic. Instead, it is focusing on the writing skills, whether the poems are properly organized. Let's say now the evidence. Also, it is in the generic nature, requiring the points to be supported by strong evidence. And then about the analysis, also in the mode of the generic and not bounded by any topics. Now let us look at an example for the task-specific rubrics. Now this will be more specific in nature. It describes it to the use of the past tense. Therefore, entire thing will focus on the past tense, or the use of story form, the use of cultural knowledge. This one more towards writing, and the focus of the assessment, it will be more specific. Personally, I feel this one is still quite generic in nature. If you want to make it more task specific, you may further narrow down the criteria. For example, the things that you're looking at when writing the thesis versus the things that you look at when writing an assignment report may not be similar. Or the site visit report versus the lab report. There are differences in terms of the tasks related to those teaching and learning activities. And if the task is discrete, custom-made specifically towards those, you may not use the rubrics for the site visit report to rate the lab report due to the compatible issues. In general, the task-specific rubrics is very specific in nature, governed by the task as well as the content of certain teaching and learning activities, whereas generic rubrics is a bit general, which can be applicable in the broader range, regardless the content or certain specific tasks, as long as the teaching and learning activities have similar nature, then the generic rubrics may be used. Now that you know there are different types of rubrics: holistic rubrics, analytic rubrics, generic rubrics, and task-specific rubrics. Each of them have their advantages and disadvantages. Then you will have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of your assessment? Which rubrics will best help you to achieve those purposes? There are various aspects that you need to consider, such as the reliability in terms of the assessment, the mechanism that you would like to use to facilitate the learning of the students, the emphasis of your assessment, and etc. Choose whichever best fits your condition, and then you will need to do some review in terms of the effectiveness of those rubrics, helping to facilitate the learning of the students and also helping you to do the assessment. If you found inconsistency between the anticipated quality versus the rated quality, then you may fine-tune accordingly. You will continue to do this until you consolidated everything, where the rubrics become effective and truly reflects the performance of the students, so that you will get more accurate assessment results for the evaluations of the students' performance, as well as evaluations of the course and program later.